All right, let's start by going back to the chalkboard. New World Order is being built, and the mechanism for change is something called 21st century fascism. It is a blending or partnership of private corporations with national and global governance. Okay? National sovereignty stands in the way of all of this. But crisis and the weaponization of international institutions are the means which they plan to fix that little problem. Okay? The United Nations is using geopolitical risk to grab new emergency powers, but there are two more crises that are currently being invoked. And I'm going to start with the climate crisis. I've told you in the past how the 2015 Paris Agreement was the Great Reset before the actual Great Reset. Corporations, banks, and the entire financial system were being forced into a global partnership. ESG was their tool of enforcement, and thanks to organizations like the World Economic Forum and BlackRock, it went into overdrive right after the pandemic. I've been on a crusade ever since to try and stop the spread of ESG in this country. I've sat in offices with state governors. I've spoken to state legislatures. I've spoken to state senators. I've spoken to just about everybody. And thanks to people like you, people in this audience, the message was heard. The anti-ESG laws that are coming out now have broken out all over the nation, about half. But there are now two major hurdles standing in our way. What are they? Globalism and the European Union. The last one is now in play. The goal is a new world order, a crisis being invoked, climate change. And 21st century fascism is how it's being all realized. And thanks to globalization, the European Union is now the harbinger of things to come. I showed you at the beginning of the show how 2024 is probably the most unprecedented election year in history. I don't know if you've been watching, but what's happened over the weekend in Europe is astounding. Right-wing parties destroyed the left. France, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, everywhere. Macron was forced to dissolve the French parliament. Now the Prime Minister of Belgium has resigned. This is what the New World Order is afraid of. And this is why there is currently a massive power grab going on by all of the globalists. They need to shut people up and shut people down. That is why I believe the UN is holding their vote in September. And it is also why the EU just approved their, quote, Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. Now, what's that? Well, it's no big deal, really. They just codified ESG standards for corporations that do business in the largest trading bloc in the world. Not many people thought that this would actually pass, but it was met by a huge push back and forth with lawmakers as well as protesters. Farmers were dumping cow manure on government buildings. It was crazy. But isn't it interesting that this new law, a measure that was insanely unpopular and doomed to fail, was rushed through 1 month before the crushing election defeats this past weekend? But this is for Europe, right? What's the big deal? Well, the New World Order not only affects Europeans and European-based companies, but also any foreign company that makes more than $489 million in the EU. Now, how many businesses fall under this guideline? Well, there are several just off the top of my head: McDonald's, Google, Ford, Apple, Cargill Foods. But that's just a tiny, tiny sample. Tons of U.S. companies are going to be subject to this. But this isn't the worst of it. This is the full text of the European new ESG law. I have this up at glennbeck.com for you to read through. But more specifically, search for the words chain of activities. It is mentioned 32 times within this document. What exactly is the chain of activities? Well, let me quote from the document. Quote, "The chain of activities should cover activities of a company's upstream business partners related to the production of goods or the provision of services by the company. including the design, extraction, sourcing, manufacture, transport, storage, and supply of raw materials, products or parts of the products, and development of the product or the service, and the activities of a company's downstream business partners related to the distribution, transport, and storage of the product, where the business partners carry out those activities for the company or on behalf of the company. What the hell does that mean? Let me explain. It's not just the big corporation that will make over $400 million held to ESG standards, but their entire supply chain, both up and down. So let me break this out by using the Ford Motor Corporation. This gets really scary when you're talking about food companies, but let's start with Ford Motor. Let's say Ford Motor Company wants to keep doing business in Europe, which they will. They now have to submit reports showing how woke and green they are. But they'll also have to submit reports showing who they do business with and who supplies them with all of the raw materials. So the supply chain jumps the pond back over here to the United States. Let's say you have steelmaker Joe. He supplies Ford with all of the steel. Aluminum producer Tom gives Ford his product. Then there's the guy that makes the wiring harnesses, or at least one part of them. The truck that drives, that is the driving company that either transports the parts or the cars to the ships. Then the shipping company that moves the cars to Europe. The power company that keeps the lights on and on and on and on. All of these U.S. companies, from steelmaker Joe to the power company, will have to prove that they are ESG compliant if they want to continue to do business with Ford, because Ford wants to do business in the EU. How many businesses will go under because they will not be able to do that? How many United States companies will go bankrupt because of this? This is huge, and no one is even talking about the potential ramifications. The last crisis that we might see invoked is a global health emergency. And ever since the pandemic, the World Health Organization has been going absolutely nuts. They proposed a power grab that was so bonkers that 22 state AGs recently unified to stop it. The WHO wanted the authority to, quote, restrict our citizens' rights to freedom of speech, privacy, movement, especially travel across borders, and informed consent. It even included a new global system of digital health passports. It was so radical that it failed to gain consensus at the World Health Assembly in Geneva just a couple of weeks ago. The threat of this power grab is not over. The agreement was struck to continue the debate. But I just want to point out, everything that the WHO wants to do can easily be done and accomplished under the United Nations new emergency powers they're about to get, if they get them. It is a historic year, both for elections and unprecedented global power grab that is underway right now. And your friends and neighbors, they're not watching the news anymore because it's depressing. They're not paying attention. And this is how you lose your sovereignty, your personal freedom. This is how the world becomes a cage for billions of people. What happens if the United Nations is successful in September? What happens to U.S. companies under this new law from the EU? Justin Haskins from the Heartland Institute and the co-author of my books, Dark Future, and the other one, The Great Reset, will join me next to help figure it all out. Are we overreacting, or is this all real?